Hello everyone, welcome to Puzzle League and another tutorial episode of the Variety Sudoku Intermediate Series. My name's Eric, and today we'll be looking at the diagonal odd Sudoku puzzle. First, we'll go over the rules to make sure we understand the puzzle. Then I'll explain the workbook solving guide, after which I'll solve a complete problem from the beginning. Let's get to it. The rules are just like those of classic Sudoku, with two unique twists. Both diagonals must contain each number from 1 up to the number of cells in the diagonal. For example, if the puzzle is 6 by 6, the diagonal must contain each number from 1 to 6. Also, the colored cells must only contain odd numbers. Let's go through this example together. If you're following along, go to page 31 of your Variety Sudoku Intermediate Workbook. I'll be explaining each of the 4 progressions. We see on the red diagonal, since only odd numbers can exist in the yellow cells, the remaining non-colored cells must contain the numbers 2, 4, and 6. Those are these cells here. Remember, it's not that white cells must contain even numbers. White cells can contain both odd and even numbers, but in this case, there are 3 colored cells in the diagonal, so the remaining 3 non-colored cells must contain even numbers. We see that numbers 2 and 4 already exist in the second block, so the numbers 2 and 4 cannot be placed in this cell here. Also, due to the number 4 in the 4th column here, the number 4 cannot be placed in this cell, so it must be placed here. And as such, the number 2 is placed in this cell here. Continuing over here with the red diagonal, the yellow cells must contain 1, 3, and 5. Since the number 5 already exists in the 5th block here, the 5 in the diagonal must be placed in the second block, over here. Also, due to the number 1 in the second column, over here, the number 1 must be placed in this lower color cell. And then that leaves us with the number 3 in the last color cell here. The last cell in the diagonal must contain the 6, and the yellow cell in block 6 must contain the number 1. Remember, only numbers 1, 3, or 5 can be placed in the yellow cells. However, we see that the numbers 3 and 5 already exist in this row. So the number 1 must be placed in the yellow cell here. In a similar fashion, following the rules, we can fill in the rest of the puzzle. Now, I'll be solving Workbook Example 31 from the beginning. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to pause the video and try it yourself first, then come back if you get stuck or if you want to know how I solve these problems. So, just looking at this problem, I see that there aren't that many numbers already filled in, but block 3 has the most yellow cells, and it has 1 out of the 6 numbers already placed. Now, since this block provides us the most information as to which numbers can go where, I want to start by filling in this block. 3 out of the 6 cells in this block are colored. That means that these colored cells must contain the numbers 1, 3, and 5. Due to the number 1 over here in the 4th row, the number 1 cannot be placed in this cell or this cell. Therefore, number 1 must be placed in this cell. Now, the numbers 3 and 5 can either go in this cell or this cell. Right now, we just don't have enough information to make the decision. But what we do know is that the other 2 numbers that are remaining in this block, numbers 4 and 6, must be placed either here or down here. Now, since we can't do much more with this block here, let's go on to this 6th block here. We see that we already have 1 number, and we also see that there are 2 color cells. So compared to the other blocks that we haven't touched yet, this 6th block gives us the most information. We know that these 2 yellow cells must contain either 3 or 5. But we also know that the number 3 must be placed in this cell because of the number 3 in the last column. So the number 5 must go here. Let's try filling out this 5th row. we know that it's missing the numbers 1, 2, 4, and 6. Now we see that in this row, there's one last yellow cell, and this cell must contain an odd number. The only odd number that's left is number 1. So we fill this in with the number 1. Now, as with the numbers 2, 4, and 6, the remaining even numbers, let's see where we might be able to place these. In the 5th row, the number 4 can only go in this cell here. Why? It's because the number 4 already exists in the 3rd column. And in the 2nd column, we know that the number 4 must either appear in this cell or this cell of block 3. Therefore, we are not allowed to put a number 4 here, because that would conflict with block 3. Now, for number 2 and number 6, number 2 must go here, and number 6 must go here. The number 6 cannot be placed in this cell where the 2 is, because once again, the number 6 must appear in either this cell or this cell in the same column above. So, we've completed the 5th row. Now, going off of what I just said, since the number 4 cannot appear in either the 2nd column or the 3rd column, the number 4 in the 5th block must be placed here. Now, the remaining 2 cells in this block can either be placed with a 3 or a 5. But once again, as with the cell over here and here, we don't know which one goes where. Let's take a look at block 6. We know in block 6 the missing numbers are 2 and 6. We don't yet know which one can go where between these 2 cells. So for the time being, let's leave the 6th row alone and come back to it later. I noticed that the 1st column has 3 out of the 6 blocks filled in, and we have a couple clues. So let's take a look at the 1st column here. We know that this column must contain the numbers 3, 5, and 6. We know that this yellow cell can either contain 3 or 5, which means that one of these 2 top cells here must contain the number 6. Let's see what happens if we put a number 6 in this cell here. If we do that and take a look at this diagonal, we see that this diagonal is missing the numbers 2, 3, and 5. Let's try placing the number 3. The number 3 cannot be placed in this cell here because of the number 3 in the 2nd row. The number 3 cannot be placed in this cell here because one of these 2 yellow cells must contain a number 3, and we can't have 2 3s in the same row. And for the same reason, the number 3 cannot be placed in this last cell here, because one of these 2 cells in the last row must contain a 3, and we already have a number 3 in that last block. So since none of these cells can contain the number 3, and because this diagonal must contain a number 3, we know that our decision to place the 6 in this cell was incorrect. Now all that means is that by deduction, the number 6 must go in this 2nd cell here. We still don't know which of these 2 cells contains the number 3 or 5. Now let's take a look at the 3rd column. It has quite a few clues for us, and it has 3 out of the 6 numbers already filled. It's missing the numbers 2, 3, and 5. We know that the number 2 cannot be placed in this last cell, or this colored cell, so the number 2 must be placed here. Now, between these 2 cells, we don't quite yet know again which one contains the 3 and which one contains the 5. Let's take a look at this last column here. This last column is missing the numbers 2, 4, and 6. Well, we know that number 4 cannot be placed in this first cell because of the 4 in the same row, and it also cannot be placed in the last cell. So the number 4 must be placed here. We also know that the number 2 cannot be placed in this first cell because the number 2 already exists along this diagonal. So the number 2 must be placed in the last cell. and then that leaves us with the number 6 in the remaining cell. Now we can fill in this last block here by completing the 6. And now, since we've just filled in one cell along this diagonal, we have a better idea of the remaining numbers along that diagonal. We're missing the numbers 3, 5, and 6 along this diagonal. But the number 6 cannot be placed in this cell or this cell. So the number 6 must be placed here. Now, if you take a look at the left, we said earlier that this cell or this cell must contain either 4 or 6. Due to the number 6 we just placed in this fourth row, the number 6 in this block must be placed up here. And then by extension, the number 4 fits here. Now, taking a look at the third row, we see that 4 out of the 6 cells are filled, and we're missing 3 and 5. Well, the number 3 cannot be placed in this cell here because of number 3 already in that column. Therefore, the number 3 must be placed in this cell, which leaves us with the number 5 in this cell. Now, along this diagonal, we see that we're only missing the numbers 1 and 3. This cell here cannot contain the number 1, so the 1 must go here, and this cell contains the 3, which allows us to fill the last cell of this third block with the number 5. Completing this fourth row, we have the number 2. Now, as you can probably notice, the further we get along with the puzzle, the easier it becomes to solve. This fifth column here, the only number that is missing is the number 5, so we can fill that in. This second block, the numbers that are missing are 2 and 4. Due to the numbers 2 and 4 in this third column, we know that the 2 must go here and the 4 here. The last missing number in this second row is the number 5, which we can place here. And now, because we know that this first block must contain the numbers 1 and 3, we can place the number 1 in this cell because of the number 1 in the first column, and the number 3 in this cell. Looking at the last two remaining cells, we can safely say that this cell must contain the 3, and that this cell must contain 5. If we take a look at each row, each column, each block, and both diagonals, we see that each number from 1 to 6 appears exactly once, and that lets us know we finished the problem correctly. Alright, I hope that helped, and now hopefully you can go on to complete the rest of the puzzles yourself.